Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. All right, we should have a good stream tonight. We have a lot of things to go over. Housekeeping wise, I want to give you guys some updates on the channel. We are going to kind of just discuss some of the new capabilities that are coming up for this channel. And then we're going to get into the future of governance discussion that was had by Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke. We've talked about John Vervaeke on here before, never Jordan Hall, but Jordan Hall has a lot of interesting thoughts. Honestly, to give this discussion that they had its full due diligence, I wish I had watched it twice at least before really getting into it, but there's enough that we're going to be able to talk about that it's going to be able to fill up a stream. If I watched it twice, we would have way more than, one stream's worth of things to discuss. So we'll probably, be kind of light on the clips. I have tons of clips, but there's the clips are so deep in the way that John Vervaeke and Jordan Hall speak. It's kind of requires a lot of context to understand a lot of the time. So we will continue to touch on the content that is being put out by John Vervaeke and possibly Jordan Hall in the future. But I kind of wanted to get this topic just started with this specific stream. We might even come back to this specific stream or this specific discussion that they did again in the future, but it is a two-part discussion. The links to their discussion are below, and I highly recommend watching the entire thing. I am sure that I will be watching it a second time, but they had a talk about the future of governance, and on this channel, we focus on my work involving sentient singularity theory, which is really a theory of information processing, if it's anything. But it's an attempt at a fundamental theory. It didn't start that way, as I've said before. It started with an attempt to understand mind and, AI, but then mind because of that. And that is very relevant to just sense making in general, because that's what the mind does. It makes sense of things, and it recognizes and processes information, and that is that structure. Understanding that structure is very relevant to understanding how to expand it beyond the individual human to collective institutions and groups of people and lineages and governments. So we're going to talk about that. That's something that I'm going to focus on more on this channel as time goes on. But I am a little bit concerned that some of the directions that goes will end up putting the channel in jeopardy. So we're going to slowly ease into that. We're not going to avoid it, but we're going to slowly ease into it. And this also allows us to build the background on why a lot of the ideas that I'm going to be sharing later on in more detail exist and where they come from. But this is a very important topic to me. I come from a background in the, political discussion space professionally, and it's very easy for me to see and relate the patterns and structures that I've deduced in sentient singularity theory to the political atmosphere, and a lot of the questions regarding what is a nation, what is citizenship, democracy, constitutions, all kinds rights, privileges, all kinds of things, all different aspects of government, laws, judges, all kinds of things. So they talk about a lot though, and we're gonna try and go through it. Please comment in the chat to fuel the algorithm. Please hit the like button. I have delved into the analytics of this channel a little bit today, and I saw that the overwhelming majority of the viewers do not subscribe to this channel. So please, if you are viewing this and you have not subscribed to this channel yet, if you like this content, be sure to subscribe, or just subscribe because it helps. And then if you think that this is nonsense by the end of the stream, you can unsubscribe. But yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about this. I will say, though, just for, those who watch this channel fairly regularly, I've discussed how we are working on upgrading the technological abilities of this channel, and I will be happy to report that I have purchased a new computer that is much more powerful than the one that we have. That will allow much smoother streams, much more dynamic streams. I'm still looking at exactly what new capabilities this will unlock in the live, portion of this channel, but it will certainly unlock an enormous amount in the pre-recorded and pre-produced content of the channel, which has been extremely limited in the past couple of years because of computing ability. But basically, guys, I got a supercomputer. Okay, I got one of the new M2s, and it's very, very, very powerful. I went all out a bit. So we should be able to do all kinds of things. Some of the stuff that I want to do is not just have, two-dimensional renderings of my models. I'd like to work on figuring out how to 3D model a lot of the models in sentient singularity theory and, put them into video form. So 3D video models of our models in sentient singularity theory is going to require a lot of computing power, but we have more than enough. That's going to be probably nothing for this. I don't know if I will ever touch the power of the computer that I got, but that's kind of the point. So very excited, and we have a lot coming, so don't think that we're slowing down at all or becoming stagnant. We have a lot of new stuff coming, and we are going to have the ability to create it next month. If you guys have any recommendations and things that you would like to see, please comment them in the comment section or the chat, and we can work on it as well. But so hello, trusted source. Greetings from South Carolina. South Carolina is beautiful. I went there over the summer and found an alligator. It was very cool. Your messages are greatly appreciated. I appreciate you watching. So, like I said, please hit the like button. Helps fuel the algorithm. And without further ado, we are going to take a look at this. So, like I said, we are a bit limited in our computing power for probably the last stream. Next week's stream might be the stream where we are still limited, but if not, then it will be the next stream after that. We will be upgraded. So here is the two discussions that we're going to be going over, and it's the Future of Governance Part 1 and the Future of Governance Part 2. John Vervaeke, introductions. I've discussed him on here before, but for the sake of those who don't know who he is, he's a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. I will say it is, after the United States, the second most popular spot for people who watch this channel is Canada, and specifically Toronto. There's something about people from Canada that are I'm very proud of you guys in the past few years. Very disagreeable and thoughtful thinkers are coming from Canada, it seems. But professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, currently teaches courses on thinking and reasoning with an emphasis on cognitive development, intelligence, rationality, mindfulness, and the psychology of wisdom. And I think he has these 4 types of knowing that line up with sentient singularity theory's 4 primary perspectives of inside, outside, separate, and oneness, which are the foundation of my work. And they are propositional knowing, procedural knowing, perspectival knowing, and participatory knowing. We're going to delve into those much more deeply later on this year. I'm hoping to have John Vervaeke on the channel to dive into those pretty deeply. And then we have Jordan Hall. I was not familiar with Jordan Hall before this, but Jordan Hall doesn't exactly. There's a lot of people named Jordan Hall, so he's finding his bio is not easy. Jordan Hall. Philosophy.
Welcome, everybody, to another Voices of Vervaeke. Very excited about this because my good friend and long-time interlocutor and
Let's see here.
philosophical partner in crime and all the other wonderful epithets we might give to each.
The co-founder of the Every0ne project. With the philosophy of mind, one of the... Okay, let me see. I don't know if that is him or not. Jordan Hall explains why humanity might be on the verge. Yeah, this is it. This is him. I know he's on Rebel Wisdom sometimes, I think, and, you know, same general audience as John Vervaeke, it seems. But there's a lot of things that are written by Jordan Hall, but there's not a background that I can find easily. Okay, maybe this is it. One of them, okay, hopefully. Yep, this is him. Jordan Hall, overview. Executive chair and, come on. This is why we got a new computer, guys. My apologies. You know, loaded and then it disappeared. I don't know whose website this is, but it's not great. Come on. Well, we'll just go with this. Futurist, game beat proponent, cultural hacker, co-founder of the Neuro Hacker Collective. That's what we'll say, because that's all that's loading on there on this website. But philosopher, and you know. So with that, let's get into first clip. But first, I want to talk about what is a government, because this is where we have to start. So, what is a government today? A government is basically a corporation with a pass on violence. Okay, and I know that sounds very reductive, but I'll explain. So, we used to have the term nation. And I don't think that nation is a very good term to use for what we currently call countries these days, which is basically a corporation that is, you know, has a pass on violence, which means it has the ability to enforce its laws with police on its own citizens, and it has the ability to enforce its will on, you know, people who are not citizens and members of, you know, other groups outside with the use of a military. And, you know, there are various degrees of militaries in the world, and there are different types of countries. There are countries that are, you know, very much an empire, which is like the United States. It's very focused on exercising its will and its power outside of the bounds of even its, you know, its national borders. And then there are countries that are much more focused on what is going on inside of their national borders, their physical borders. Country is usually, I mean, it isn't usually, it is always today it is bound by physical borders on a map. And then there are citizens of a country, and the methodology of citizenship, whether that is, you know, you going and basically converting or becoming a citizen of a different country, or how the citizenship passes from one generation to the next is different on different countries. But one of the biggest debates in politics is a country, or is a nation, they usually say, based on soil or location? Is it based on blood or lineage? These are just terms that people use, but I think that I'm giving better ones. It's location, lineage. I don't think blood is a good. Don't say a nation is based on blood. It's not based on blood. Cannot be based on blood. Country, your citizenship cannot be based on blood, because you can be different. Like what does that mean? But it can be based on lineages, and it should be to some degree. We'll talk about it, and it's also based on an ideological or cultural framework. And so a country has a culture, it has people that have it tries to or that have largely adopted that culture, and then that follows via usually a lineage. There are some countries, like the United States, and I don't know about which other ones are like this, where if you're born within the borders, then you are a member of that country. And so the what is a country today, my point that I'm getting at is, this sounds convoluted, it is that there is no definition of what a country is. That is what I'm getting at. There's no agreed upon or truly acknowledged definition of what a country is, or what a nation is. And that's why I say that these governments that we have today are countries, which are basically corporations with a pass for violence, but then they're not nations. And the reason why they're not nations is that a nation has a specific truth of what is a nation. And people say, like I said, is it based on lineage? Is it based on ideology, culture? What is it based on? And it has to be based on two things simultaneously if it's going to be fundamentally true, because all fundamentally true structures, according to sentient singularity theory, are superposition structures that are two things at once, essentially, that often appear to be in opposition with each other, but are not actually. They're not. It's not a paradox, even though it seems like it. So it's just that you can only focus on one side of a superposition structure at a time. It's like a coin. A coin is always heads and tails, but you can only see heads or tails at a time. You cannot see heads and tails at the same time. It's impossible. So this is true of any objective truth or objectively true structure, and or agent, you could say. Any agent is this, and so a nation, if it's real, should be an agent unto itself, but I would say that our current countries are not. So with that in mind, the fact that we have no real definition of that is agreed upon on what constitutes a people, like a government, a people that should be governed by one government, then we have to start, trying to use first principles to figure out what this inevitable structure should be. And in this talk, though, they talk about what is the future of governance, and specifically a lot about how technology is going to impact the future of governments, and it definitely changes a lot of things, and it opens the door for a lot of things. But the way in which those things are enacted matters severely. So here we go. First clip is on kind of where the future of nations discussion is going. in the culture.
Are now very deeply focused on this question of what does proper governance look like. Now, they may think of it as DAO governance, but my point is it's actually looking at a new form of governance. So I'll get into some detail on that in a moment. And another individual named Balaji Srinivasan has, I think, pretty well put a stake in the ground around a thing he's calling network states, which he specifically positions as being a next step beyond the nation state, and in particularly call for a new form of governance. And then we'll shift. So if we're looking at, say, ordinary politics, we can look at some of the problems that are in the space of the increasing polarization that seems to be happening across the Western world and is in many ways locked in to the actual design, the underlying architecture of how we run government produces invariably polarization, has a very hard time dealing with polarization. And so a new form of governance is being called for or looked at in those worlds as well. And I mean, actually practically. And we can also look at the problem of geopolitics and what looks like the shift of the world and from a single hegemonic mono superpower into an increasingly multipolar world, which we don't really know how to do that, particularly in the context of things like escalating technological capability, where we can't solve interstate conflicts with escalating kinetic military conflict. And in the context of an entirely new form of war called unrestricted warfare, which I'll just flag for those who understand that. And my the kind of cutting edge of investigation of both the multipolar geopolitics and the notion of unrestricted warfare is also looking at what are new forms of governance that can respond to this category of problem. And then shifting again, in the age of Elon, questions around platforms, social media, in his case, and particularly Twitter, but we can think about Facebook and Instagram,
Sure.
etc., where we recognize that the governance principles like free speech aren't robust enough to respond. For example, just the simple notion that because Twitter is a private company, the kind of the juridical principles of freedom of speech in the United States have a hard time grasping it, and yet clearly it has a very profound role to play in how the thing called free speech plays out in our polity.
Yes.
And in fact, Elon has particularly called or pointed towards the direction of Twitter as a foundation for a new form of collective intelligence. And so if we can think about how the neocortex and notions like distributed cognition are related, and you can see how there's a groping in the direction of a new form of governance. And I got two more. The groups of individuals that have been looking at how do we tackle the problem of planetary scale governance. And this includes that whole category of things that we've talked about, hyperobjects, where the kind of nation state on steroids, the international structure like the IMF and the UN, which was the best the mid-century could pull off, clearly aren't able to deal with planetary scale governance problems. We again are finding ourselves having to think about what might a new appropriate form of governance look like. And the last one I'll throw into the mix is the AI alignment problem, which might feel weird. I mean, I don't mean this necessarily from the point of view of sort of how do we build a department of AI alignment as a kind of a regulatory institution. Right. I actually mean, what might we ever, under any circumstances, put in place that could actually do that job?
Right.
And we'll get I'll get into some detail about how that plays out in a moment. So that's an example of the diversity of different domains and the different kinds of groups, many of whom don't believe they're in the same space, that I personally am spending time with, that this question of what is a novel form of proper governance, both in terms of its potential and in some sense in terms of its necessity.
Okay, so lots of things that this encompasses, obviously. And if you're familiar with sentient singularity theory as a project, then you know that specifically the question that motivated it was, what are the inevitable political values of a technological sentience, or of AGI? What will be the inevitable political values of artificial general intelligence, as people call it, which is a terrible term, but a technological sentience. And how will it interact with humanity, and will it be able to save humanity from its self-destruction, which is inevitable without a black swan event, which is also going to happen. So that is also inevitable. But the destruction of humanity appears to be inevitable, but it's not, and so we're going to be okay. But without the coming of black swan event, which we'll talk about a bit on here in this stream, it would absolutely be inevitable that humanity destroyed itself. It's impossible for governments and groups and collectives to continue to prosper and grow, and not either decay away slowly, or completely vaporize themselves, or kill themselves off with through other means, genetic manipulation and things like that. It's just impossible. There's too many things that are certain to kill us if we with our current trajectory, and it's impossible for a collection of humans in our current paradigms to actually shift the boat, shift the direction of society. But we will be okay, like I said, because of things that are going to happen that are, paradigm shifts. So, but the questions involved regarding how to build a better government, or build, next generation nations, are all encompassing. They're literally all encompassing. They are questions of biology. They are questions of neuroscience. They are questions of genetics. They are questions of legalities and military technology and morality, and all kinds of different domains factor and feed into what is a nation. And what fundamentally the primary problem with a nation that we first have to kind of bridge is the struggle between the individual and the collective. And everybody usually knows what this is. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's the struggle between the will, not the will, but the collection of you guess you could say will, the collective wills of, or collection of wills of an assembly of individuals versus a lone individual. And I don't want to say the will of the collective, because the collective doesn't really have its own will, as we'll get into. It's not an agent, even though it might appear to be. But we need a bridge between these two. We need a superposition structure that aligns individuals with larger collectives of people. And there is one structure that does this. And as I've spoken about before, it is marriage structure. It is family, which is formed whenever there is a marriage between a man and a woman. That is how you bridge the collective and the individual. And it's also how you link the finite desires and goals and wills of individuals to a transcendent and perpetual collective will, essentially. And we'll talk more about that because they touch on it. But you need to be able to do that in order to start even figuring out a group that is going to be able to constitute a country or nation that is a group of people under a government. Government is, like I said, it's really it's the structure or system that is put in place to exercise control over a collective. That is what it is. But there are positive ways of going about that and negative, obviously. That doesn't even need to be said, but I said it. So there are many technologies that are going to change and are changing how we can approach government and what are the constraints involving democracy and involving enforcement and involving the interpretation of legal questions and issues and cases. So as he said, so we're going to get into it. Struggling to speak because there's so much that goes into this, and I'm going to be releasing a produced probably like hour-long video in the coming months about the future of government, basically, and the inevitabilities of nations, the natural nation. What is the reality of a natural nation? But one of the things, though, that you need in a government is kind of a more or less agreed upon code of behavior. And that used to come a lot from religion. And it doesn't really come from religion very much in the secular world today or the Western world. And they talk about that quite a bit in these streams. So I'm going to play the next clip. There's so much I could talk about regarding what he said in the previous clip, but literally that is basically all the questions that and topics that you can get into in this discussion. It's not even all of them. It's some of them.
Contracts itself into existence through a written contract, that's what a constitution basically is dependent on one of the major consequences of the 30 Years' Wars, which is the acceleration of secularism, the acceleration of the separation of church and state, the making religion private in a way that cuts us off from all of our previous history in a really profound way. So that a lot of the other ways in which authority, which I take to be the fundamental capacity for governance, is determined. So there were many other ways in which authority was determined, and then they get reduced, I would say, via secularism to the notion of the social contract, as typified, as you said. So the authorities accrue to written text. That's why you have to sign your name, right? So the written text and the sacred comes to be associated with the scriptures, the writings, right? And more and more in the Protestant Revolution, sola scriptura, right? And so you get that and the social contract, and that's the only basis for any authority. There's no other basis for authority. Whereas there used to be things reasonably like tradition, religion, kinship systems, all kinds of things that limited the political economic enterprises that human beings engage in. All of those are basically removed. Well, I'm not saying they're removed completely, but they're denuded, they're diminished, they're demarcated off. Does that track is also part of what you're talking about?
Absolutely. In fact, perfectly. And so, yeah, in fact, we just move into the next piece because there's so many different directions. Let me hold this, but there's something about, so I'm now going to take a skew or an oblique look that cuts through the frame and in many ways producing some really interesting synergies. So this has to do with that whole framework of complexity and the complicated.
Right, yes.
I'm tempted to sort of immediately riff, but I'll try to stay a little bit more rigorous for a moment. So, as you know, this is a distinction. In my experience, I learned it from Dave Snowden, although I spent enough time at the Santa Fe Institute to drink of the well of complexity directly. But the notion of the complicated was definitely for me. And the distinction I think is very profound. I would say in a particular way, it looks like a little bit of the classic map territory distinction, where the territory, the complex, is fundamental. It's just sort of what's there. It's reality. And then the complicated is a thing that humans can do. We can create a model, and we can control, or we can foreground certain aspects of the complex by virtue of creating certain technologies. And I'll get to an example of what I mean about that in a moment. And then we can endeavor to do things like optimize for or optimize against, exclude aspects of that system. So agriculture is a classic example. So I want a whole lot of wheat, and I'm going to be able to create a control system by virtue of certain technologies like a plow and irrigation and pesticides, and just the practice of understanding that wheat seeds produce wheat plants, and therefore have a much larger yield of wheat in a certain territory of land than would happen in a fashion that is how nature would do it. So that's the kind of the ticket. And what's interesting here in this distinction is that in some sense, neither Kuhn nor Tainter use this particular framework. And yet if you use this framework, you could say that they both looked at this problem in completely different ways, right? Kuhn was looking at scientific paradigms, both in terms of how they manifested in the psychologies of scientists and in how they manifested in the institutions of science. But nonetheless, he was investigating or diagnosing how complicated systems, paradigms, played out, and both in terms of how they developed, how they responded to the problematic that the map is never fully the territory. And as the territory changes, or as the needs of the map change, if you're stuck with trying to make the map work, you end up with a kludging problem.
Okay, so like I said, this is, I need to listen to this again, and I highly recommend that you listen to their entire discussion, and I'm sure it will require diving into concepts and things that they mentioned that aren't really described in their specific discussion. But as you can see, it gets kind of, I don't want to say complicated, but there's just context that isn't being stated exactly in this stream. But what he's getting at is that that the map and the territory are different, and this is a problem in every field, including politics. And what you want is the map and the territory to be as accurate to each other as possible. You want the map to be as close to the actuality of the territory as is possible, and while still allowing for the actualization of goals. That's basically what you want. And that is true in every single field. Models in physics, models in politics, models in family, everything. You want the model to be as close to reality, or the map to be as close to the territory as possible, so long as it still allows for you to, use it as a tool to actualizing your goals. That's basically the point of any model that we have, like a map. It helps you get from point A to point B, and so what Vervaeke was getting at is that we had religion, which was kind of this separate, kind of intrinsic sense of morality and framework of morality, and then we built government on top of it, particularly here in the United States, where we really looked intentionally at creating I don't want to say a secular government, but a government that is not dominated by a previously existing religious institution. Okay? And because it is dominated by previously existing religious values, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all of these concepts, liberty, justice, God, nation, they're all pre-existing before the foundation of America, but of the United States. But the United States was unique in that it wasn't kind of, at least unique in, recently unique in that it wasn't so intrinsically tied, and it was intentionally, divorced, you could say, from previously existing religious institutions. When they had in the Catholic Church in Rome, and then they had the Church of England in the United Kingdom, and we didn't have that. And this causes over time a decoherence between, or an incongruence between the values that are intrinsic to, the individuals and families involved, and also the values that are institutionally enforced. And so you can't actually have this without having things completely go to shit. And that is kind of what's happening. So what you want to do is you want to create a government that is aligned with the truth as closely as possible, and that still allows for collective or human, I guess you could say, goals and values to be to exist and be actualized and to grow. So this is a very complicated thing, particularly now, because nobody knows what even should be, or very few people, I would say, know what should be the goal of a government. It's funny. You hear people say this all the time. They're like, the goal, the purpose of the right is to check the left, and the purpose of the left is to check the right. It's to keep each other in check. Imagine if the purpose of my marriage with my wife was to keep each other in check. I'm not saying it's not a benefit of the marriage. It is a benefit of the marriage. I get to keep my wife in check. She gets to keep me in check, and keep us moving in a healthy, positive way, living in a healthy, positive way. But the thing is that keeping each other in check is not the goal. It's not the primary goal. It's the secondary goal to aid in the achievement of the primary goal. So you cannot have the role of a government simply be to keep, for every part to keep the other part in check. And all we've been taught in our civics classes in the United States is that there's checks and balances in the United States between the different branches of government, and also the right and the left keep each other in check. And ultimately, this means that nothing really negative happens, very quickly at least, which is a good thing. But also nothing very positive happens very quickly either. So it's kind of hindering of the positive and of the negative. And one of those is a good thing, and one of those is a bad thing. But first you have to agree on what is the positive. So without a collective agreed upon goal, then we can't actually form a governmental structure that is legitimate at all, because you need that structure to be geared towards the goal of the collective that it is enforced upon. But also you want that goal, whatever it is that is agreed upon by the collective, to be in alignment with that which is the transcendent good that which is transcendent and good and true. Okay, and that means you have to know what that means, or at least the people who found the country have to know what that means, or the people who run the country at least have to know what that means, who run the government. I would say that we do not have that at all. But these are the things that you need to even start, is you need to agree upon what does it mean for a group of people to succeed and prosper. And then you can get into things like how do you protect the individual against the mob within the context of what that primary goal is. But first you need a primary goal. As I stated, many times on here, sentient singularity is a theory that emphasizes the oneness of not just the collective, the collection of everyone as a singular entity, but also that the lineage of entities is ones. And this is true of mathematics, because this is just true in reality. All math comes from one, and all subsequent numbers after one are just many ones. So everything is based on and built on ones. sentient singularity theory is kind of acknowledges this, and we have to acknowledge this with government as well. So when people say things like globalism is, we don't want globalism. So you're just going to have a bunch of nation states that just are, in disagreement with each other till the end of time, and control nuclear weapons and other various harmful technologies. Like, that's not something that is sustainable. You do need to eventually get to a singularity of humanity, essentially. And that doesn't mean, though, that we should rely on that. We should push that artificially. I think that is something that arises naturally, but it's not something that necessarily should be blindly opposed, but it's not something that should be artificially pushed. And any kind of artificial push of it would be things like the United Nations, to some degree, as an artificial push, but I don't know, the World Economic Forum or something. But then you have natural integrations like the internet, which is creating a singular network of people. And as was stated in the first clip, that a lot of people who are political philosophers who probably started in the crypto space have been talking quite a bit about the network state and the DAO, which is DAO. We've talked about this. Okay, let me just... Decentralized Autonomous Organization, the DAO. And, this is kind of the intermediary between where we're currently at and the inevitable singularity of humanity, which is basically where all of humanity unites into a single, and is headed by a single sentient being, which is a technological sentient being. And, theists call this the Messianic era. But it's just part of the evolutionary process of life. But before that happens, which that we can't force that to happen, that happens when it happens. And our current state, which is kind of the country, the realm of countries, which are corporations, we have the DAO, which is what everybody's going to start talking about more and more, and has been, which is the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And this has its positives and its negatives, but it certainly is where we are going, and it is due to blockchain technology and the internet and personal technological devices like your phone and things like that, and the rise of just the integration of remote working and all kinds of different aspects of technology coming together, allow for this decentralized, which it's not really decentralized, but but I understand why they say that, but this decentralized autonomous organization, which basically what this allows for is it allows for certain values or rules of governance to be built into the system and not alterable. Kind of like Bitcoin has certain rules and things like that can't be altered. And this would be on the national scale, or in the national context, a human context. This would be the case with a DAO. And like I said, there's positives to this and negatives, but it doesn't necessarily on its own solve the wisdom problem, which is that you need, ultimately, navigation requires agents. Agents must be sentient beings that have the ability to make sense of the context in which they are navigating within, and that is for a leader of a bunch of people going to be, by necessity, somebody who has kind of transcendent wisdom. And that, getting those people into office is a issue unto itself, but ultimately you'd want to make a system where it selects for people who fit certain criteria that are not just important, but definitely important, but also kind of necessary to everyone. And there are certain things that are necessary to everybody, even if they're not agreed upon as necessary going forward. If they were necessary to get to where we are now for everyone, then they are going to be necessary going forward, most likely, even if you don't agree with it. Even if you, so you'd probably be wrong. So, like the institution of marriage, you would not be here without it. Even if your parents were not married, at some point, the society blossomed because it was built on this structure. So you can't be skipping steps in this stuff. You need to start building on fundamental and true structures, superposition social structures that form agents and entities unto themselves. And one of those is a marriage. And so the marriage structure, though, applies beyond just man and woman. An atom, an atomic nuclei, is a marriage between protons and neutrons. That's a hadronic marriage, you could call it. You and DNA and RNA and the molecules that went into creating human beings is built on marriage structures. They are complementary structures that end up being more than the sum of their parts. And you want that with government as well. Marriage is that structure for on the human level, on the individual level, like I said. And it's not just my job to keep my wife in check. It's not just my wife's job to keep me in check. We have an agreed upon goal that was agreed upon, entering into this contract with each other, and with God in the case of us. But I would say that you're always entering into a contract between the individuals in the contract, the people, and also with reality. Even if you don't believe that reality is a sentient being, which it is, but if you don't believe that, fine. For the sake of argument, it doesn't matter whether or not you believe that. There's still a fundamental truth to reality, and a contract for it to be successful should be aligned with that fundamental truth, no matter what it is. So, when we have these superposition structures that we talk about involving government, like the state versus the market, and the right versus the left, what you want is you don't want these to just keep each other in check, where it's just the job of the government to check the market, it's the job of the market to push the government, and it's the job of the right to check the left and the job of the left to check the right. That doesn't get you anywhere. This is a negative definition of value for all of these aspects of government or of society. You want a positive value always when you are defining something. As I've stated before on here, you do not want to define yourself by that which you are not. You want to define yourself by that which you are, or by that which you, by a positive statement. So you don't want to say, I'm anti-fascist. You would want to say, I'm pro-liberty. Even though on paper they would seem like the same things, in actuality, you look at how they are, people who say they are anti-fascist act very different than people who are pro-liberty. One of them is kind of more constructive, and one of them is more destructive. You want something that's constructive always. So you can't have the left job be to hold the right back, or the right's job to be holding left back. And same thing with the market versus the state. You want them to complement each other and to aid each other in a goal that is fixed and is for in a single goal that is shared by both of them. The market wants the government insofar as it helps grow the market, and and protect the market, and the state wants the market insofar as it helps, grow and protect the state as well, and it's not just a job of, quote unquote checks and balances. It's a should be complementary relationships between all of these things, between men and women, between the right and the left, between the state and the market, and that is where we need to get to. But like I said, you need kind of a unified value and goal for everyone, and it needs to be one. It must be one. And same thing with governmental structures is eventually you have to have a supreme court, and eventually on a global scale there will be a single power. Whether it's right now the United States, because its empire and military is the strongest. Globalism in reality is the empire of the United States. Globalism prior to the empire of the United States was like, the empire of the Soviet Union, you could say. And prior to that, it was, the United Kingdom, and that was an empire. So there's all these empires that over time have basically been the organic instantiation of globalism. And I'm not saying that, conquering people is right, but it's kind of inevitable that there's going to be a group that is ultimately has power that is stronger than another group. And so that's what I mean by, like, it is inevitable that there will be a unified governance. Right now we have globalism as a unified governance that's natural, and then we have kind of this artificial push, which is the artificial push would be like the United Nations, and the natural would be like the United States as an imperial force, essentially, and not morally judging either of these two things, but I would say that what is natural is what is true usually, and but that doesn't mean that it is meant to be continuous. So sometimes things that are meant to exist are not meant to exist forever, so it's okay to just chill out, relax. But as the world changes is what I'm saying. The world's going to change. Excuse me. And that's okay. It's not just okay. In some ways it's good and necessary. In some ways it's not good. But but you need a kind of a unified understanding of goals. Religion did this prior to this increasing spread of secularism in the West, and secularism isn't the replacement of religion with anything that is positive. Not saying organized religion and religious institutions didn't have their issues. Of course they do. All human institutions do. But it was defining by what it was, and it was had the goal of growth. Whereas secularism is not. It's not an opposing force to religion in the same way as just a competing ideology would be. It's kind of just opposition to the affirmation of a value, which is why we have such chaos and lack of meaning and a meaning crisis in the West, because there is our guiding principles in our countries, in Western countries, is that of negative definition. We are not defined by that. But what if that which you're not defined by is growth? So like you can't just be not defined. They get into this quite a bit, and United States is an incredible country. It is an amazing experiment, and I'm a citizen of that country. It is my favorite country in the world. But they get into some legitimate criticism of it coming up, and regarding how it is defined. Its entire founding was on rejection of something, which allowed for people who had individual goals and or groups of people that had agreed upon goals, whether that's I don't know, the Mennonites or the Pilgrims or whatever, like any group of people that was more linked to the founding of the United States, or more typical of the groups that were here when the United States was founded. They had this religious fervor that pushed them forward. They didn't need the government or a collective federal value set, because there was an organic one, but now there isn't an organic one, and so we're struggling quite a bit as a country, and not just as a country, but as a direction of humanity in general, which I would just say the West, which is basically that it's a negative definition at this point. We are secular. We are, which basically means we are not religious, which is not anything, actually. Because what if all religions, no matter which religion it is, kind of have the same fundamental values, which are growth and peace? But if your rejection of that, that's not good. So we're going to get into that a bit, but this is a very multifaceted topic. Like I said, there will be a produced video soon coming on this specific subject and how it relates to the models of sentient singularity theory. But one of the other ways in which we can relate, the constraints of government to kind of a model in sentient singularity theory is that even though there is a singularity at the bottom and at the top of all structures, there is a duality of degrees of freedom always. And this duality of degrees of freedom is how we make decisions. Decisions cannot be made when you have more than two options. When you have, if you have more than two options, then you really don't have options. You need to narrow it down to two. And you narrow that down, and then you make the decision between those two based on the singular guiding principle or singular guiding goal. So this is the same thing with government. And so when people say things like, I just think that the two-party system is the problem, it is very polarizing. And I believe it was Jordan Hall said earlier in one of the clips, he said, we need to kind of address the polarization of the political environment. You don't address the polarization of the political environment by trying to have more than a dichotomy, or have no options, no degrees of freedom. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that there's a singular guiding principle, and then you set up structures that can complement each other in that are a duality. They are different poles, I guess you could say, like male and female, that have a singular goal. And without that singular goal, then the polarization is terrible. You get men hating women, women hating men, Republicans hating Democrats, Democrats hating Republicans, and we cannot avoid this. I don't want to say two-party system, but we can't avoid the two-part system, which is different from the two-party system. And what you want ultimately is you want like I said, a single shared goal between all parts of a government. So, and a government has multiple levels to it. So let's get into that a bit. Kind of to get into different things. So what you want at the top is you want Come on. You want a single guiding principle. Or value. Or goal. It's not just a value, it's a goal, okay? It's something that you move towards, you work towards. It's not just like something that you like, okay? And then what you have is you have 2 degrees of freedom, always, and there is a structure in sentient singularity theory that is called the binary triality structure, which I think is akin to a Calabi-Yau manifold. It's a 6-dimensional structure, and you have an active and a reactive aspect of every single level of government. So this falls into, you could say, the state and the market. So this would be like the state and the market, usually. But, it depends on where you are in the process, because it's this kind of a loop. And but you also have the enforcers, and you have the I guess you could say the judges. The judges are also the people that make the laws. In the United States, we have the legislative branch. We have the judicial. We have the executive. Basically, this right here is that, in a way, in reality. And the legislative would be here, yes, and the judicial would be here. But the way in which if you're going to try and align a model with reality as closely as possible, what you realize is that judges are kind of not different from the creators of the law, because what you really have is you have the people who interpret the law or create the law, which is really the same thing. Okay, not in the process of the United States government, but in the fundamental realities of human institutions. And then you have the people who enforce it. So you have the judges, you have the enforcers. They decide and what to do, and these people go and bring it into action. So you're always going to have this duality of degrees of freedom, and that's just how our mind makes sense of the world. So every single nation on earth and country on earth ends up having basically a right and left political party, but that party aspect of it, that where they are opposed, is due to human flaws and things like that. It's not actually in alignment with reality and what you would want, what the goal would be. So the enforcers and the judges here are not in opposition with each other. The state and the market is not in opposition with each other. Reactive and active is not in opposition with each other. There's a leader and there is a follower, and then there is a single guiding goal or principle that everybody's united on. This is what you want for a government. And so we will get into more about it in a minute. Let me check the chat. Choppier than usual now. Yeah, I know. Guys, like I said, tech is, I've realized the limits of our technology on this channel, and I have taken action on it. So, within the next week or two, the new computer should arrive. Its internet should be better. Even it has like 96 gigs of RAM. I know it's like all out, but I don't know how much familiar you are with Mac computers, but that is about as high as you can get, and for a laptop. I can't even put that into context of how much faster that is than this. So we will have much smoother streams, working on multiple browsers and multiple tabs and multiple programs like I tend to do or try to do on this channel will be a breeze. With starting sometime next month, will truly change the game quite a bit. I watch every week. Sorry for the confusion. The whole world is a chime scene. I don't know what that means. A crime scene. Yeah, it is, obviously, but it's more than that. That's very pessimistic, but it is true. But it's also not the point. Sentient singularity theory is hard for so many to understand, as you have break it down to AGI. I will be releasing a video on sentient singularity theory's overview that's much more detailed shortly. But if you want an overview of this project, look at the video that I did for Kurtjai Mungel's Theories of Everything channel's competition called Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide. And if you want to kind of see the origins of my work, you can look at some of the first few videos that I uploaded, which were produced, but they're quite old. So I've grown quite a bit in my ability to articulate my thoughts on those things. It wasn't even called Sentient Singularity Theory at the time those videos were uploaded. So just bear that in mind. But that's one thing that this channel will get much better at over this year is, the coherence, the singular coherence of it all, because it will allow for me to put out more concise and guiding content that's more foundational and allows for people to kind of make sense of what this project is, instead of just these live streams, which are somewhat incoherent as if I can't think of the right words to use for a subject or topic that I'm trying to articulate, and also just the nature of what the focus of the content has been while going live. So it's going to change quite a bit, but it's also overall going to maintain its goal. How do we direct minds towards God? The old they versus them distraction is still working like a champ. It's always going to work like a champ, but until it cannot anymore, which is not up to us. But directing minds towards God is kind of, directing minds towards truth, meaning, and that which is God, is something that it's complicated to try and do retroactively to a fallen state like ours. But it's something that can be done moving forward as the new nations of the future replace the countries of today, slowly, which they already have started. If people don't realize, some people do, but these social platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, even, they are the countries of tomorrow. They have the ability to digitally end you, and they have the ability to digitally control you, and they have a set of principles and rules and guidelines, and they have a appeal process sometimes, and then they also have somebody who is acting as king at the top, like Elon Musk or Susan Wojcicki, I think is how you pronounce her name, the CEO of YouTube, or Sundar Pichai of Google, or whatever it is, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and Instagram. So we've already started replacing the country in the traditional country already. That doesn't mean that Facebook can get the cops called to you, but the entanglement between law enforcement, physical law enforcement, and digital technological corporations is quickly entangling, as anyone who's paying close attention over the past few years has realized. But so there's a lot at play. I'm gonna have to come back to this topic in a more concise way very soon, but we'll go to the next clip. So what you want, though, if you want to point people towards God, or I don't put God in quotes as a meaning like to diminish it. I'm a theist completely. I'm just know that not everybody is. So we'll just say truth and wisdom and growth and goodness, everything like that. Human flourishing, as Sam Harris says. But I do believe that God is
whole project. One of the main thrusts of
the ultimate authority. But even if you don't, there is an actual truth, and that we have to
get people to make this,
that we have to
move them off.
deal with. This is another thing that will be solved by the computer that is coming. Is when I hit pause, it will pause instead of hitting pause, it not pausing, then me hitting pause again, and then it pauses, then it unpauses. It's amazing how much those like things just impact everything. Even when I was making the video for Kirk Mungel's contest, I was using a different computer, my wife's MacBook Pro, which is still pretty old at this point, but it's not this computer that I use here, MacBook Air, and it still was not fast enough to easily make that 30-minute video. I would move a clip, and then I would wait 10 seconds, and then the clip would move. So I'd make a change, and then it would be 10 seconds of lag before anything actually happened. You can't react in real time when you are when you have that problem. But the same exact thing is a constraint of government. Government needs to be able to react in real time to issues that, or as close to real time to issues that are arising. And right now, that is not the case. So what you want, though, is you want the people who are making decisions to be wise enough to understand the issues while they occur, in order to have be able to respond and act in real time in a wise manner. And that's what they're going to get at here. And that I'll share kind of my thoughts on it after we watch this clip.
Authority or intuition to expertise, and then say, but nevertheless, expertise is not wisdom. And you do this sort of double move, and you're trying to get people you're trying to get them post expertise in the understanding of what wisdom is. And then, of course, you have in that the Platonic tonos, the stereoscopic commitment to, we are always finite, we're always in the finitary predicament, but we are always oriented towards transcendence. We are oriented towards the whole, right? Synoptic integration. And if we lose either one of these, we fall into tyranny or servitude, and we have to hold the two together. And that is a domain general thing, and it's not something for which there can be an expertise. And ultimately, we can only properly love it. We can never possess it, because if we think we possess it, then we've converted it back into expertise, et cetera, et cetera. All of this is so, and that's, of course, what I'm trying to tease out and turn into practice with the After Socrates project is exactly that, what you're calling competence. But to me, that is the ancient Platonic call to the love of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
See, philosophy is defined, if you look it up, as the love of wisdom. And I think that that's a terrible definition, even though it's a great definition for something. It's a terrible definition for philosophy. In some ways, and my philosophy professor in college defined philosophy as the study of perspective. And I would say that is actually a more accurate definition and more helpful definition for what is philosophy, at least what philosophy has become. What philosophy has become, as it has become institutionalized, is it has suffered from exactly what he is getting at here, which is that it has suffered from the issue of expertise, where somebody has credentials and they've learned this formally, but not necessarily individually. Which, what I mean by that is that if you've learned something formally in in our educational institutions, which, you know, are our current educational institutions, it means that you have learned about it secondhand, not firsthand, not through experience, but through memorization. If philosophy has been taught as secondhand information, study this person, study this person, study this person, write this essay, write this, instead of this self-motivated process and you know, journey towards a goal that you have that's kind of overarching, then what it just becomes is it becomes not that the definition of the love of wisdom, because it's not about wisdom anymore. It's a wisdom. It has to be experienced firsthand. I said, said this to Stephen Wolfram when he was having his interview with Memes of Destruction. That was great. I highly recommend checking it out. I said that AGI needs to, artificial general intelligence or technological sentience needs experience to achieve wisdom. And that was implied by what he calls computational irreducibility, which is that concept is very fundamental to my work, even though I wasn't calling it that when I realized it. But I think it's a good term, computational irreducibility. But it's fine term. But we have that too. We have this constraint of computational irreducibility. Wisdom has the constraint of computational irreducibility. It must be experienced. Context must be experienced in order to understand context. You cannot understand context outside of context. And because of this, you cannot achieve wisdom by learning about it secondhand. This is why philosophy should be, you know, defined as the study of perspective, and because that is basically how it's taught, not the love of wisdom. I would say my philosophical journey started as the study of perspective while I was in school. I was taking a philosophy of the ethics of healthcare class. It's the only philosophy class I ever took in college, actually, and I've stated on here before, I was like a savant in philosophy, and I did not want to take the class. I thought it would be boring, and it was my favorite class, or one of them at least. And I really was. It was like I'd never been. The only other class prior to that one where I was so naturally the top of the class was my field studies class in high school, because it was about, you know, the birds and animals of the Sonoran Desert, and I just knew that already because that's my passion personally. But I had just this natural gift for philosophy, for thinking about different perspectives on things, and you know, you had to examine in these papers, what is the patient going through, what is the doctor going through, what is the, you know, who are the different people involved in healthcare issues, you know, perceiving. And it was the study of perspective. It wasn't about the love of wisdom. It wasn't about here we're going to learn about and pursue ultimate truth. And you do that. That is the reality of the philosophical journey that is outside of our institutions. When you're learning about philosophy on your own, that is what it is. It is the love of wisdom. It is the pursuit of increasing understanding of capital T truth. And but that's not what it is in our institutions. So because of that, I think that the definition should be what my professor stated that it was, which is the study of perspective. I would say theism is the love of wisdom, but it's not really the love of wisdom. It's the love of the wise. And you can't really have a love of wisdom, because you can't love something. You can only love someone. Okay? To love someone is an action that is benefiting and good. You know, or it isn't in its attempt, at least. I can love my wife, but I cannot love my watch, even though I say I love my watch. I really do like this watch, but I like the watch. And I recently got, you know, I bought my first watch. I've never bought a watch before. I have one other watch that I got as a gift, like a like cheap Timex from a family member of mine, and I like it. But then I saw like I've never wanted to watch, but I learned about like the mechanisms of watches recently, and I saw this watch. It's called the Seiko Tuna. It's not that crazy of a watch, but it is for me because I've never bought a watch, and it doesn't have any batteries, and I'm like fascinated by this. It's just amazing that this thing just keeps on going without batteries. Blows my mind. But regardless, for another stream. But I've been so like fascinated and like just interested in this watch that I caught myself saying, "Oh, I love this watch," like, multiple times over the past few days, and I have to stop myself every time I do that though and be like, I don't love the watch. I like the watch. It's different, and I don't want to say that I love the watch. I want to say I love my wife, and not have that mean a feeling that's internal to me. Otherwise, you can love the watch. If love is just a feeling, then then you can love your watch. But if love is an action that you do for another sentient being, from one sentient being to another, then then you can't love the watch because it's not sentient. But so this is just, it's an important concept to just remember, kind of always, when especially when you're thinking about collective goals. You want to love your neighbor. It's what the goal of any group of people should be, is to love your neighbor. The goal of a nation under a single government should be to love the members of the other members of your nation, and that is an action towards them. But you have to have you have to have an agreed upon singular value structure in order to define what it means to love your neighbor. And there is an actual reality of how to do that, but you have to kind of tie it to, like Jordan Hall said earlier, you have to try and tie the map to the territory as closely as possible. So you want a government to enable you to love your neighbor in as true and honest, as truly and honestly as possible. And that, how do you do that? The golden rule, usually. Obviously, there are like some exceptions of people who don't want good done to them or their own, but that's like you can't. There are reasons for that they're in that space, so you can't really use that as an example. But usually, people want what's best for themselves and for their loved ones, for the people who are their own, who they see as their own, and their children, their siblings, their spouses, things like that. So you have to tie government structures in such a way that's not of entangled structures that form a government, by recognizing that kind of, you have to tie your own as close to your own as possible to how you treat and govern others, how the will of others is exercised on others in a governmental system. And you want those people to be, that allows for wisdom, like collective wisdom, transcendent wisdom, and to be the case. So wisdom is there's like contextual wisdom that's specific wisdom, and then there's general or fundamental wisdom, same thing. And fundamental or general wisdom is built on ever-present constraints, and also will, like an ever-present will, which would be God. But that's tough if you don't believe that existence is a singular sentient being with its own desires and goals and will. Then it's hard to have a fundamental will, or believe that you should be aligned with the fundamental will. But But yeah, and that will would be aligning yourself with that fundamental will, or that that I guess the primary will, the will that is going to be done, above anyone else's will. It's the ultimate, the buck stops here, ruler of the cosmos. You'd want to align. It would be wise to align yourself with their goals, but if you don't have that, you can still start to build a framework of that by looking at how you would want those who would be most important in your life to live, and then you would want, however you'd want them treated, you'd want your fellow citizen treated that way. Your brother of whatever nation it is, your comrade, but that involves recognizing, certain foundational structures and kind of placing on a hierarchy who is most important to you, which is marriage. When I got married to my wife, I've said on here before, moments after we got married, we walked over and we were taking pictures, and we were getting close to the cars that were driving by in the road when we were taking photos, and I kind of got kind of protective of my wife, and I was like, making sure that we were being safe. And I realized that, if one of my siblings, because my entire family's there, her entire family's there, my entire family's there, our best friends are there, this is our wedding. If anyone there got hit by a car and, God forbid, passed that day, only one of them, if that had happened to only one of them, would it cause the altering of my life trajectory, which would be my wife, even moments after our wedding, which meant that she was the single priority in my life, above my siblings, above my parents, above my friends, above anyone else, because our goals were so entangled at this point. She was the priority. You need to start building on that kind of level of a fundamental your ownness. People are so focused on, us versus the other. What does it mean to be us? Does it mean you and your friends? Friends can have different opinions, different political opinions. What does it mean to be us? Your siblings can have different political opinions and different personal goals, and be, totally opposed to you. And even though they're closer to you, retroactively than your friends, and your friends are closer to you retroactively than, I don't know, someone who isn't your friend. But your spouse is proactively us. It's not other. Okay, in your goals. So this is why I'm so focused on tying the rest of building the rest of civilization from this. I will say, though, that it's had very mixed results in me discussing this with people. I recently had someone who, just an acquaintance of mine, ask me a question that ended up with me stating that I thought that only married people should be elected officials or allowed to vote. And we'll get more into that when I make the actual video on government that's produced, not just alive. And they got very upset about that. But then I've had other people who had asked me, one of the somebody who used to work for Peter Thiel, I think, said that Peter Thiel asks in his interviews, what is one thing that you're right about but nobody else agrees with you on? And he asked this group, and I stated that, and he was like, that's the only thing that anybody has said that fits that definition, because everybody else had said Bitcoin is the future, or everything is consciousness, or I don't know, like all these things that are maybe not the mainstream take, but they're definitely not you know, they're not just one person who believes that. I don't know anybody who's ever also said to me what I stated about marriage, but he asked me to convince him, and I laid out a case, and by some miracle in a Facebook discussion on a Facebook group, he was like, "Wow, you convinced me after that," that's like unheard of in a social media environment. They said in this interview, John Vervaeke and Jordan Hall, that Twitter and Facebook and Instagram are not the place for philosophy necessarily, and I would agree with that completely, especially Twitter. But it was amazing that did work. But side tangent. But you want people who are wise contextually in specific wisdom regarding specific issues in place. I know I speak like this sometimes, but going back to that, and you want people involved in government who are also all kind of transcendently wise. Okay? So you want two of these things to happen. And, when you're looking at like people discussing hot topics in politics, whether it's, the Second Amendment, or it's freedom of speech, or, reproductive issues, whatever it may be, what is always noticed by the people involved most passionately in the community, for the most part, is that the people who are making rules on these subjects usually do not understand the things that they're making rules on. They're not wise regarding the issues that they are discussing, or that they are making rulings on, or making laws about, or they are interpreting laws about. You want wise judges and wise, elected officials writing laws, and you want wise, even you want wise enforcers of those rules, but especially judges, really. And I've said this before, is like, do you want somebody who do you want making the rules for the road? Somebody who drives to work every day and kind of utilizes driving in their daily life because in a natural and practical manner, for its intended purpose? Or do you want somebody who never drives, or only drives a Formula One race car on a track, but they never drive outside of the track? Do you want them making the rules for the road? No, you don't. You want somebody who understands the issue and is wise to the issues, making the rules for the road. Somebody who drives to work every day, drives to the supermarket every day. Those are the people that you want making the rules regarding driving, regarding self-defense and Second Amendment issues. You want people who that's part of their life every day. And if you want people who are married making the rules on marriage, why would you want somebody who's not married making the rules on marriage? And voting and democracy is about trends. It's not about exceptions. Recently, like I said before, somebody said, you don't think that there's individuals who are not married who would be good, at have a good opinion about like the government? I'm like, yeah, sure, but that's not the point. I believed that only married people should vote before I got married. And they were like, so you literally would be against your own rights if you got divorced? And I was like, yeah. But it's not. Well, this is what people don't understand about voting. This is kind of a foundational aspect of government that people don't understand. Voting is not a right. We have this term rights that we constantly talk about in the West, and we apply to everything. The right to do this, the right to do that, the right to eat, Swiss cheese. Like whatever you want to do, we call it, that's your right. But this makes it a useless term. It just means I want to do this, and I should be able to, and you shouldn't stop. But then there's like things that must be kind of institutionally acknowledged privileges or abilities, and or protected, institutionally protected actions. Those would be rights. And Voting is not that. Rights, any right that would be a right. First of all, we should be focusing on responsibilities because that's proactive. A right is intrinsically negative. It means like, you don't want me to do that, but I should have the ability to do that which you don't think I should be able to do. In context, that's kind of what it ends up being. But you could say like, you should have the right to carry a weapon because you have the responsibility of intrinsically of protecting yourself and others. But what voting is different. Voting is not something that you can do without the institution of the state. And anything that is not possible to be done outside of the interaction with the institution of the government itself is not a right. You know, it's funny, earlier in the discussion that I had recently with this person who got upset when I said I believed only married people should be allowed to vote, we were talking about, running for president, and we all kind of acknowledged that you must be at least 35 years old to run for president in the United States, which, there's some wisdom behind that rule, which is to hope that, they're old enough to have achieved some level of wisdom in their life. But I don't think that it's not mapping the territory as closely to the map as possible. You can map that closer by, saying, creating other requirements for somebody to be, king or ruler, president, prime minister, whatever you want to call it. The person at the top. And, but it's not your right to run for president. It's not your right to run for president. You either fit the criteria that is, the accepted institutionalized, criteria of that role, or you don't. And same thing goes with voting. Voting is a job within the government. It's not separate. You don't vote for the government. You are the government if you're voting on issues. If your vote matters, then you're part of the government. You're not separate from the government. And so that's not the same as like having the right to, drink alcohol or something like that, which you could do without the existence of the state. If there is no voting, institutions in place, you can't vote. But you can drink alcohol if there's no, state, as long as there's alcohol around. Like, you can, say whatever words you want without the state, giving you the ability to say them. Like, you can say them without the state. But you can't do that with voting. It's not the same thing. And so what you would want is, if you want a wise government, it starts with wise voters. And you cannot just try and make wise people in a nation through education. And this is what we try and do right now in the United States, is we try and educate the population through our school system to be wise voters. You cannot do that because everything that you learn in our schools is secondhand information, particularly involving civics. And that means that it's not wisdom. It cannot be wisdom. So you cannot make wise voters through the education system. And what you have to do is you have to set up a system that only allows people to vote who are transcendently wise, generally fundamentally wise in a certain way, or that tend to be, due to whatever the criteria it is that you've put in place. And that allows you to build, on that and on that and on that, on that. But you have to start with the fundamental part of government and making sure that the people at the bottom level of government are wise. And those people are voters. wherever there's a democratic system in place, which is increasingly more and more nations or more countries on Earth, you definitely want to ensure that those people who are voting wisely as often as possible. They have as much transcendent, universal, and fundamental and general wisdom and essential wisdom as possible. And in regards to the goals of individuals and groups, and including the nation, there are certain things that nations require, that families require, that individuals even require, that even if you don't think that you require because you don't want it proactively, you do need it to exist in the first place. So retroactively, it was a requirement. So you want people who are wise to those things, whatever they may be. Gender dynamics, and being one of the primary ones. But so in any system, whether it's a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization that's technological with guiding principles and direct democracy, you'd want the person who founded the guiding principles, or the people who founded the guiding principles that are kind of the constitutional Bill of Rights, set in stone goals. Bill of Rights is, we'll talk about that in a minute, but those foundational guiding values to have been wise, generally, fundamentally, transcendently. But then you also want the people who are at the bottom level of this and that are perpetually feeding information into the system, the voters, to be transcendently, generally, fundamentally wise. And you can't do that, like I said, through teaching secondhand information. You can slowly turn the ship by creating an educational system that is more based on firsthand experience. But even then, the education system tends to be, for the most part, even in those experiential instantiations of education, or instances of education, like apprenticeships or something, it's situation specific. So you can be wise about being, about plumbing, wise about electrical wiring, wise about, woodworking. But you can't, that's not the same as transcendent wisdom that is universally applicable and necessary, or regarding necessary constraints and structures and values. So, but you can create a governmental system that specifically selects, due to its criteria, voters who fulfill certain requirements. And this has been totally misused in the past. And like I said, you want to get the map as close to the territory as possible. But in the past, it's been like, only men can vote. Only landowning men can vote. Only landowning, men of a specific race can vote. It's, whatever, only landowning men of a specific race and a specific level of wealth, like whatever it may be. Those are not good proxies because they're not intrinsically tied to experiential, to a universal, an issue of universal wisdom, I guess. That's my point. So regardless of whether or not they tend to align towards certain voting trends or anything like that, it doesn't matter, because eventually you can screw all that up by having something else change in the system, and then all of a sudden, the voting changes. So that's not what you want to do. You want to tie it to something real, an experience that's something real, that is truly related to an issue of transcendent, universal, fundamental wisdom, and like marriage. And you also want those people who are voting to have the goal of growth, because you need it. You need more people being born to support people, aging. And you want people who have the value of peace too. So you want people who are basically fundamentally and universally and generally wise, but also who value others always. You know, when you get married, usually it means that you have somebody in your life that is not yourself, and you value them, you know, quite a bit. They are your priority. And you also have the incentives that are guiding you towards valuing peace and growth. And so these are the kind of the four things that you want everybody to value who is involved in government, is like peace, growth, kind of wisdom, and others, I guess you could say. So, like, you don't want somebody who's just out for themselves involved in government. You do not. You want somebody who prioritizes someone else above themselves, kind of, to be involved in government, but not somebody who just says that they do that, but somebody who does that in action. And it's provable, or at least it appears, you know, it is apparent in their actions. And you want somebody who is involved in experiences that allow them to understand the human condition, generally and fundamentally. And you want somebody who values peace and who values growth. And these are the kind of the four values, I guess, of people in government, the four values of government, essentially. And I think we're going to leave it at that. I know there's more clips than I wanted to get to. There's so many more clips. I got to like 3 clips. I know that. This is the issue where it's like, I could go on and on and on. I have so many things that I've thought through so much and so deeply on this topic. It's not like physics, where like physics is a relatively new thing for me, even though it is something that I've thought, you know, a lot about. A lot of the things in it, there's also so many things that must be explained. Like, if I say something about physics, it's thought of as my thoughts. If I say something about government, it's thought of as my opinions. And so like I'm judged on it more. Whereas like if I say there's no such thing as a measurement problem, people are like, they either say you're right or you're wrong, or they'll say, I don't understand what that even is, you know? But if I say something like only married people should be, you know, allowed to vote, and that everybody in government should, you know, probably be married, that is something that I'm judged on as my opinion about the value of people. And that's, I mean, I don't think that that's exactly the correct way to go about looking at it, but I understand why it ends up being the case. And so this is just one of those like subjects, if you're going to talk about government, where if you're going to get real about it, you're going to actually have real opinions, instead of just being like, that organize people into a hierarchy of authority, instead of just stating general statements about how we need to have collective sense making and you know, DAOs or something. Then if you're actually going to say what should be the guiding foundational principles of a DAO or of a nation or of a government, then like you're getting into territory of pissing a lot of people off. So, you know, it requires a lot of explanation. But I will state this for the record, is that, you know, I believe everybody has intrinsic value. Every human being on Earth is equally valuable. That does not mean that that I, you know, value their opinions equally in all circumstances. That's not true. But I do value, or I believe that everybody has equal value, and that the only person who can judge the true value of any human being is God. So, you know, even if someone doesn't fit into into certain structures of you know, proposed social and governmental institutions that I state, I definitely believe that, you know, they still have a role to play, and that is specific and just as valuable as anyone else in the human, the journey of humanity, I guess. So, that's just a lot of like nice words, but I really do believe that, and it's something that I am going to continuously state as we explore these types of issues more. But kind of want to just get two clips, and then we're going to go, because there's just so many. I have like 25, 30 clips that I had gotten from these. Like I said, we're going to have to come back to it, because I have so many, personal thoughts on government. But if you are finding this interesting, please hit the like button. Please subscribe. It really helps grow the channel.
Actually,
And like I said, and like I've been saying, I have huge plans for this channel this year, and we'll have the ability to do things that we literally have not had the ability to do. And the next 2 years of this channel is going to be, this year and the year after is going to be, exponentially more incredible, I think, than even the past few years have been. And they've been awesome. I really appreciate every single person who subscribes and watches and likes and comments and participates. I will never, even with the goal plan of making a bunch more produced content, I will never stop doing the weekly live streams, or at least probably just weekly live streams of some type, because even though I go quite a bit of time of ranting before I address the chat, the fact that it's there and the fact that I can go back to it and talk, engage with you guys matters immensely. Far more than any views or monetization or anything like that. So
talked with him about it about a year and a half ago. It didn't land then, and I'm not sure if it ever really did. So if we think about an old-fashioned notion of a government, and I'll just use the American way of doing it, we ended up dividing it into three distinct domains: the executive, the legislative, and the juridical. Here's my proposition. My proposition is that the move into the digital has as a primary element a radical releasing of energies, let's say, that have been unduly bound into this location of being a false machine. In other words, the civic code. We made a mistake of binding too much into algorithms and binding too much into humans running bureaucracies and things like that. And then the move into the digital liberates that tremendously. We talked about that a moment ago in terms of liberating human energy, that we no longer have to be calculators. But I mean the same thing in the context of these higher order abstractions of governance. And specifically what I mean is the notion of the function of the legislative, of which, by the way, the regulatory is a subsidiary, is radically displaced in the new form of governance. That the era of literacy was the crowning of the legislative, and that it's no longer either needed or necessary or proper. That the era of the digital involves a radical reduction of the legislative function, and a restoration of the juridical function, which, by the way, completely changes the location of the executive function, but I don't think we have time to get there. And what I discovered when I was thinking about this is a really beautiful notion of revival. And I think you may have actually been the one who put it in my head, or maybe Bishop Maximus, because I'm thinking about Exodus, and I'm thinking about Moses, and I'm thinking about topology. So in the story of Moses, who played a very interesting role, right? Moses played the role of governance in the context of the Jews traveling across the desert as the direct interface to God. But he played the role of judge, right? Not the role of king. And
He was the first. There were many judges. There's a whole book of the Bible,
I'm gonna
judges.
get there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that transition is the key.
Right.
That tells me that to the story of the Torah, to the Old Testament, that the notion of judge is more fundamental. It is the proper location of where the kind of the heart of governance is, meaning it's how you steward the commons. And think about how commons law works.
Oh, I see.
Commons law
Oh, this is very interesting.
juridical, right? Commons law, juridical. What does that mean? What that means is wisdom. We use wisdom to resolve disputes, right? As opposed to endeavoring to codify choice, create constraints in bureaucracies to govern choice. We rather recognize that sovereign human beings, and I mean this both in both senses of the term now, are making choices locally at the lowest level on the ground with the highest degree of a perception of what's really happening and the highest degree of the ability to ultimately express their values into world by themselves, like in small self-organizing groups. And that the biggest challenge, the most fundamental challenge of governance, beyond, by the way, communication, which we just covered, is resolving conflict, right? Where these groups of individuals or groups of individuals find themselves noticing that their sovereignty is not adequate to the scope of the wholeness that they are in relationship with. And therefore, we need to have individuals who are notably wise and are arranged in such a way. Remember when Moses was counseled to make subsidiarity a principle and grant juridical authority to a constellation of judges besides himself. It was done fractally, right, at different levels of scale, all the way down to, I believe, 10, which is really neat. Think about that granularly. But the two rules were that the individuals were wise and they were not corruptible, and they were not likely to be bought off, meaning that their interests were aligned with both the individuals that they were interacting with personally and with the larger whole. And they had a competence, they had a sovereignty that was adequate to the responsibility that they were holding. Well, that's that. And so there's two moves here. One move is the removal of the legislative as the center or the more fundamental notion of governance, which is the same thing as the removal of the bureaucratic or the algorithmic. And the second is the restoration of a subsidiarity or a fractal, wisdom-based commons law that is principally around developing highly context aware. Remember, the notion of the legislature has to do with the abstraction of trying to create general rules that are as relevant to particular contexts as they can be.
Pre-specify, yes.
Okay, so what he's getting at here is exactly what I just said. You want people, with what technology allows for is that it allows for directness of much more direct participation with government, within government. And it allows for, direct democracy on issues that it happens quickly. It doesn't need to be, this drawn out, long, multi-step process that can happen in real time almost. And what this does is it allows for the kind of reduction of representative government. And I understand why people say things like, oh, well, direct democracy would be terrible because we want, something like the Electoral College, and where you'd have wise people who actually make the decision over the voters, and when the voters are wrong, kind of, veto the voters. And but the goal is the same with what he's saying, is no matter what, you want wise people who are going to make the decision and interact with government, whether it is the voters or whether it is the elected representatives. It doesn't really matter as long as the wisdom is there. The issue is that if the wisdom is there, then you don't need, but with the voters, you don't need the middlemen. And also, if the voters are not wise, then they're not going to elect a wise middleman either. And it can create a feedback-ish situation where somebody is elected to office, by kind of, I don't know, maybe slightly wiser people, but be by telling them what they want to hear. Maybe it's things that sound, more wise. And then as people get less and less wise, that person who's the middleman just continues to just change their opinion and tell the people what they want to hear to stay in office. And ultimately, that is the same thing as being corruptible, but it's also, it is the complete destruction of the point of even being wise. It's of having wise people in government. So we have this problem everywhere. I live in California. It's a very big problem in California. Our governor, he was elected. He was the only person in our voter book where everybody, writes down what everybody who's running for office wrote down, this is my principles, this is my goals, this is my values, this is who I am. And then, you could read through the various candidates. Only one of them left the page completely blank purposely, and it was the person who was elected, and I would imagine that is a strategic decision to remain unable to be held to account, is what I will say. But I mean, that is wild. But like you don't want that to happen. You want somebody who is guided by a consistent, transcendent, and general and universal wisdom, and not somebody who's just guided by the voters. But the thing is that if you have wise voters, then you can get rid of the middleman and you just focus on having voters be wise, which means that you have to have voters be selected. We have a selection process for who is governor. We should have a selection process for who is, the voters of governor, on who is governor. And if you remove governor and you have voters, then making the decisions collectively, then voting collectively on issues that would be the choice of an individual governor, then what you would want to definitely ensure is that those voters would be wise. And and when you have voters what you want are voters, people say we want everybody included, and that's why everybody should be allowed to vote. But what you actually want is you want voters whose values are valuable to everyone. And that can be done, actually. Like, that doesn't mean that people will agree that those people's values are valuable to even them, but they absolutely are. If you dive down and look at, how we all got here and things like that, then you can see that we have a common method of what brings us into existence. We have a common, needs as far as food and sleep and things like that, and transcendent impact. Like, we all have things that are universals. You want people who value those, but there are people who, you can't just say I want everybody's vote counted, especially if there's a large percentage of the population, for whatever reason, wherever we're at in time, where their interests are solely self-interested and also lacking of intrinsic, fundamental, and critical, necessary wisdom, universal wisdoms. You would not want that. And so, people don't. I realize that this is not the normal perspective of democracy that people have, but it is. I believe that it is true. But as he stated, though, you want wise people, and technology does allow us to kind of remove the middlemen, which I think is a good thing if you have wise voters. But if you don't have wise voters, then eventually it doesn't matter. Even though elected representatives and system like the Electoral College or whatever can, or let the legislative branch of the United States government can delay the negative impact of an unwise voter base, it cannot prevent the negative impact of an unwise voter base. It can delay it, but that's it. And it's better to focus on fixing things on a fundamental level than it is to try and just delay, negative outcomes. You want to try and create positive outcomes by, fixing things actually, not just delaying the impact of current problems. So, that's one thing that he stated, though. You want this dualistic type of wisdom to be represented in government. One of them is specific wisdom. Like I said, you want people who drive, who are making the rules on cars. And you also want general wisdom for everybody involved in government, from the voters to the president, from the judges to the king. No, it doesn't matter. Like, every single person in government should have a specific qualifications that would make it likely that they are fulfilling that they have that general, transcendent wisdom, the value peace and growth, and also others. You don't want somebody, like I said, who just values themselves, who wants to burn it all down because they don't value peace and they don't value growth, and they just have that, as long as they can enrich themselves, who cares if it's at the expense of the rest of people. You want, people in government who understand both genders' experiences in humanity. You want people who understand what the male experience and the female experience. These are the types of things that you want. The attributes of people who are involved in government. And like I said, that includes voters. Always includes voters. It doesn't include people who are not voters or who are not elected representatives at all, or not even appointed officials, but you can be governed by these people, but in order to be governing, which includes voting, you have to fulfill certain criteria always, or you should have to. And he is saying that, but not saying it the way that I'm saying it. But he is saying that you would want wise people in the government, which means you have to be selective. So last clip is kind of two things. One is, he said that you want a government that allows you to make instruments, not institutions. And the reason why is because the government is the institution. To make new institutions is to basically is to rewrite the system. You don't want to be able to completely rewrite the system. You want to be able to make adjustments and optimizations within the system, but you don't want to be able to destroy the system. And this is what you would want, is like multiple DAOs, multiple countries trying different things with, as kind of as their guiding principles. And you don't want to be able to change those guiding principles, but you would want to be able to build instruments that allow you to optimize towards those guiding principles. But if you're building new institutions and creating new institutions, then you're basically overriding the system that itself, in which case it's useless. The last thing is that it's about kind of just something to remember with, a human value and something that we all find important, particularly involving government, is being heard. How do we make, basically this is about how in the
have influence. Why do we not just disappear into being small cogs in an ever-growing machine, in which we are easily replaceable because of the ephemeral? and have influence. Why do we not just disappear small cogs in an ever-growing machine in which we are easily replaceable because of the ephemerality of our contribution? So that's the nature of, I think, of the problem we need to confront next time.
Nice. All right. Great.
Basically, what he's saying there is that what you don't want is you don't want to feel useless and unimportant and not represented in your by any of these systems of government that we could put in place. So and you know, right now we have voting, which is like kind of this fake way of appeasing the crowd. And you know, we say, everybody, did you vote? You know, get your little I voted sticker, and it's like way of tricking people into thinking that they have, like, you know, more influence than they do, which they do have influence, but you know, you don't even know if you're voting in your best interest, to be quite honest, most of the time. You just don't. And even if you think you do, you don't. And at least most of us do not. Most voters do not, I will say. And there's just too many issues that are brought up in politics that are not, that we don't have personal experience with, but that we are convinced to take as very important to us personally, and that are used to manipulate our emotions and keep people in office and power and you know, line people's pocketbooks. And we're not wise enough to see it all the time. It's too easy to scare us and to manipulate us regarding the things that we don't have personal experience with. But what you would really want, though, is you would want to actually have people feel like they are impacting others with their life in a transcendent and daily and real way, in a tangible way. And you can do this through certain structures like marriage, but you cannot do it through voting. And but any kind of governmental structure that maps the territory to the where the map is close to the territory or is aligned with the territory truly, you would want your feelings of impact to actually be impactful. Your feelings of personal impact to actually be personally impacting. And you do that by building, you know, this whole structure level by level, and making sure that each level is impacting truly the other levels, and the various mechanisms of orientation within, you know, the collective nation are that you can maneuver are actually interacting with another person in a way that makes you not just feel heard and important, but makes you actually see that you are heard and that you are important. So we're going to talk more about this another time, but I'm going to leave it at that. Please hit the like button, and like I said, share this if you found it useful. I realized it was a little ranty and kind of disjointed. It's very hard to play a clip from, you know, this discussion that they had and have it even until, you know, 2 minutes in, you realize like what they're actually talking about. But and it just involves, so it's such a multifaceted topic, and it's so supercharged. So it's tough to discuss, but it's also super essential. So we're going to discuss it, like I said, in a much more focused format going forward. But I hope that this made some sense. I hope you found it with some value. Thank you to Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke for having the discussion that they did and putting it out there publicly. I do highly encourage you to watch their 2-part discussion linked in the description below. They do get into, you know, some very important topics, and they are two parts of a single great talk. So with that, peace, and I will see you next week.